Morning dear student, I am Dr. Rekha Jivne, Professor and Head Physiology. Today I am taking the lecture on female reproductive system. Learning objective of my lecture are: at the end of my lecture you must able to answer the following: anatomy of the female reproductive system, female sexual cycle, ovarian cycle, ovulation, hormonal profile at ovulation. Anatomy of female reproductive system. As all of us know that a female reproductive system, it is consist mainly of the ovary, fallopian tube, uterus, cervix, vagina. Ovary, one pair of the ovary present in the abdominal cavity. Main function of ovary is formation and release of the female gamete, that is the ovum. Fallopian tube, one pair of the fallopian tube, it is present in the abdominal cavity. Fallopian tube capture the release ovum and transport it to uterus. Uterus, it is the childbearing or bearing organ. It is the site of implantation of product of fertilization. Vagina, it is the organ of copulation. Female reproductive physiology. In female, two issues has to be addressed for childbearing. First, formation of the female gamete. Second, preparation of the uterus to receive the product of fertilization. Formation of the female gamete, so that the formation of the female gamete, ovum, that is known as the oogenesis, and this oogenesis take place in the ovary and it causes the formation of the ova. When the ova form in the ovary, some changes in the ovary occur, that is known as the ovarian cycle. And when the ova is formed, the single ovum is released from the ovary into the peritoneal cavity near the fallopian tube. This process is known as the ovulation. When the ova, it is the released into the peritoneal cavity near the fallopian tube, it enter inside the fallopian tube through the fimbriated end of the fallopian tube, and there fertilization of the female ova occur in the presence of the sperm. Then this fertilized product goes into the or enter into the uterus. When it enters into the uterus, some changes in the uterus occur. And uterine cycle. Now the uterus, as we know, it is the childbearing organ, prepare itself for childbearing. Female sexual cycle. Female sexual cycle can be divided into 3 periods: birth to puberty, puberty to menopause, postmenopausal period. Birth to puberty. During this period, primary and accessory female sex organ remain quiescent. Puberty occurs between the 12 and 14 years of the age. Puberty to menopause. With the onset of puberty at the age of 12 to 14 years, female sexual cycle start. This cycle, it repeats every 28 days. The occurrences of the first menstrual cycle is known as the menarche. The permanent stoppage of the menstrual cycle is known as the menopause. The menopause mainly occur at the age of about 45 to 50 years. The period between menarche and menopause is known as the reproductive period. During this period, female have the rhythmical sexual cycle. Postmenopausal period extend after menopause to rest of the life. During this period, the female sexual cycle ceases. Female sexual cycle refers to monthly rhythmic sexual cycle occurring in female during normal reproductive period. During a component of female sexual cycle, during cycle, rhythmical changes occur in ovaries, uterus, cervix and the vagina. Now the ovarian cycle. Ovarian cycle, it is the rhythmic changes occurring in ovaries during each female sexual cycle of about 28 days. During each cycle, a single mature ovum is released from the ovary. These ovarian changes depend on the gonadotropic hormone. Gonadotropic hormone, the hormone which is released from the anterior pituitary, that is the follicular stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Ovarian cycle can be divided into three phases: pre-ovulatory phase or the follicular phase, ovulation, post-ovulatory phase or the luteal phase. Pre-ovulatory phase or follicular phase. This phase starts from the 5th day of cycle till the time of the ovulation. This phase generally lasts for 8 to 9 days but may varies from 10 to 25 days. Mostly follicular stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone is responsible for this phase. Pre-ovulatory phase or the follicular phase, we know that the formation of ova from the primitive germ cells is known as the oogenesis. Primitive germ cells increase in number to form the oogonia. Oogonia is a stem cell from which ova are derived. Oogonia proliferate by mitosis and form primary oocytes. Now this primary oocyte converted into the primordial follicles. At the time of puberty, both ovaries contain 300,000 primordial follicles. Primordial follicle present since 18 to 22 weeks post-conception. Primordial follicle, it contains primary oocyte in prophase of the first mitotic division. This oocyte, it is surrounded by the spindle-shaped cell, granulosa cell or the follicular cell. Granulosa cell and the oocytes are surrounded by the thin membrane known as the basal lamina. Granulosa cell provide nutrition to oocyte, and these granulosa cells also secrete maturation inhibition factor, oocyte maturation inhibition factor. It keeps the ovum in the immature stage. Now the primary follicle. Primary follicle, it is the formed when the primordial follicle undergo some changes. Now first changes, there is the increase in the size of the oocyte and it becomes the 20 microns. Granulosa cells, which are the flat or spindle shaped in the primordial follicle, become columnar and undergo mitotic division to form a multi-layered stratum granulosum. Zona pellucida, a homogeneous membrane which consists of glycoprotein, it is present between granulosa cell and the oocyte. The appearances of zona pellucida in follicle referred to as the multilaminar primary follicles. secondary follicles. In the secondary follicle, when there occur the changes in the primary follicles, the secondary follicles is formed. The changes in the primary follicles, now the granulosa cell undergo further proliferation. Size of the ova increases from the 20 micron to 100 micron. Its nucleus become larger and vascular, forming the germinal spots. Appearances of theca cell in discrete layer, that is known as the theca folliculi or follicular sheath. It is the formed outside the basal lamina from the spindle shaped cell from the stroma of the cortex in ovary. The theca folliculi consist of inner rim of secretory cell known as the theca interna and outer rim of thickly packed fibers cells known as the theca externa. After proliferation, the granulosa cell starts secreting follicular fluid. This causes cavity in the stratum granulosum, which is known as antrum or follicular cavity. The fluid filled in antrum is called liquor folliculi, and these liquor folliculi, it contain estrogens. Then tertiary to fully matured follicle. Now again the granulosa cell continue to proliferate. Size of the follicle increases. From 7th day of the sexual cycle, one of the tertiary follicle increase in size in response to the gonadotropins, follicular stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, and form the mature follicle that is known as the Graafian or antral or vascular follicle. It is uncertain that only one follicle is selected to become the mature Graafian follicles in the follicular phase of the cycle. And the rest of the follicle degenerate and become atrophied by the apoptosis. Then regulation of the follicular phase. In the follicular phase, the rising estrogen level, it show both positive feedback locally and negative feedback centrally. There occur the rising inhibin level, further negative feedback, declining FSH level, withdrawal, growth support, atresia in lesser follicles. Now we know that the gonadotropic releasing hormone, it is secreted from the hypothalamus. This gonadotropin releasing hormone stimulates the anterior pituitary and causes the production of the causes the secretion of the follicular stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Follicular stimulating hormone then act on the granulosa cells or act on the follicles. When the follicular stimulating cell act on the follicle, the growth of the follicles occur. And luteinizing hormone, it has the effect on the thecal cells and then on the androgens. It causes the proliferation of the granulosa cells and convert androgen to the estrogen. And granulosa cell also causes the secretion of the inhibin. Now this inhibin, it has the Now this inhibit further have the negative feedback effect. When it has a negative feedback effect, the hypothalamus secrete the less amount of the gonadotropin releasing hormone, less amount of the FSH are secreted, and less amount of the luteinizing hormone is the secreted. The effect of the estrogen is on the follicles. It has the positive feedback, also the negative feedback. Now when we see the summary of the the different stages of folliculogenesis, first there is the primordial follicles. In the primordial follicles there is the oocyte which is surrounded by the granulosa cell, and then this oocyte and the granulosa, it is covered by the basal lamina. It is the basal lamina. After that, in the primary follicle, there occur the proliferation of the granulosa cell, increase in the size of the oocyte, and formation of the zona pellucida. In the secondary follicle, the theca cells appeared. Size of the oocyte again increases, and again the proliferation of the granulosa cell occur. The proliferation of the granulosum cell, it causes the generation of the antrum. In antrum, the fluid, it is the filled. So antral cavity is formed by the further proliferation of the granulosa cell. Further proliferation of the granulosa cell occur, and the ovum, it is the ready for the ovulation. The ovum, it is the released from the ovary. It is released from the follicles and entered into the peritoneal cavity. When it entered into the peritoneal cavity, remaining follicle, it is converted into the carpus luteum. If pregnancy is there, fertilization is there, then this carpus luteum is maintained by the progesterone. Otherwise, it is converted into the carpus albicans. Folliculogenesis. Follicular phase of the ovarian cycle, preantral phase, it require the it is the independent of the gonadotropins. Antral phase, it is the dependent on the gonadotropins. Then the secondary follicle converted into the tertiary follicle, small Graafian follicles. If it is the dominant, then ovulation occur. If it is not dominant, then the atresia or apoptosis occur. Second phase of the ovarian cycle is the ovulation. Ovulation refers to release of secondary oocyte from the ovary into the peritoneal cavity. Usually occurs 14 days after the onset of the menstruation. Indication of the ovulation: basal body temperature. The basal body temperature falls slightly just prior to ovulation and increase slightly after ovulation. Therefore, the time of ovulation can be determined by measuring the morning temperature from the rectum or the vagina for a few days during the mid period of menstrual cycle. Second is the hormonal level in the plasma. The plasma contains of FSH and LH. LH and estrogen levels are increased and FSH level is decreased at the time of ovulation. Progesterone level is increased after ovulation. Other methods of other indication of the ovulation: LH surge, Immunological tests, cervical mucus test, decrease in the viscosity of mucus, endometrial biopsy, it shows the proliferative changes or the secretory changes. Ultrasonography shows the growth of the follicle, vaginal cytology, keratinization of epithelium. Now the ovulation. Process of ovulation involves the following sequences: LH surge and ovulatory peak of the FSH. Onset of LH surge, it started at 34 to 36 hours before ovulation, and the peak of the LH or the peak of luteinizing hormone surge occurs at 12 to 24 hours before ovulation. Mean LH surge or increase in the LH surge is started from 34 to 36 hours, and it leads to the peak point at 12 to 24 hours before the ovulation. Immediately before the LH peak, the estradiol level in the plasma fall. Ovulatory peak of FSH occurred 2 days prior to ovulation, which is stimulated by the progesterone. The luteinizing hormone and the follicular stimulizing hormone produce the changes in the Graafian follicles before the ovulation. First, rapid swelling of the follicles. This is caused by FSH and LH a few days before the ovulation. There occur a rapid growth of new blood vessel into the follicular wall, and the prostaglandins are secreted into the follicular tissue. Now, the growth of the new blood vessels and the prostaglandins in the follicular tissue causes diffusion of the plasma into the follicular fluid. When the plasma it enters into the follicle becomes swell. Due to rapid swelling of follicle, its outer wall is stretched, forming a very thin avascular area that is known as the stigma. And this stigma protrudes like a nipple in the peritoneal cavity. Now from the theca externa cell, proteolytic enzymes from the lysozymes is released, and this it is activated by the progesterone. Now, because of the swelling and the thinning of the follicular wall, there occur the further weakening. of the follicular wall. As soon as the more stretching and enzymatic dissolution of follicular wall occur, within 30 minutes of follicular wall occur, the stigma burst out. Within 30 minutes of protrusion, fluid began to ooze from the stigma, followed soon by rupture of follicle with release of ovum, which is surrounded by the corona radiata, into the peritoneal cavity near the fimbriated end of the fallopian tube. Thus, only one ovum is released from any one of two ovaries during each sexual cycle. So there is a rupture of the follicle. When the rupture of the follicle occur, the ova is released from the follicle into the peritoneal cavity near the fimbriated end of fallopian tube. luteinizing hormone, it secreted the progesterone, and the progesterone secreted the proteolytic enzymes. Proteolytic enzyme, there is the follicular hyperemia and the prostaglandin secretion. Weakening of follicular wall, plasma transduction into the follicles, disintegration at the stigma, follicular swelling, follicular rupture, release of ovum. Post-ovulatory phase. In the post-ovulatory phase, luteinizing hormone, follicular stimulating hormone level decreases, but the level of the progesterone it increases, and level of the estrogen also decreases, but after some time it increases. Post-ovulatory phase is also known as the luteal phase. In the luteal phase, ovum released in the fimbriated end of the fallopian tube. Ovum along with the few supporting cell, it is released, and remaining of the follicle is filled with the blood immediately, and it is known as the carpus hemorrhagicum. Minor leak of the blood from the follicle into the abdominal cavity, it may lead to the lower abdominal pain due to peritoneal irritation. Now, in the carpus hemorrhagicum, the granulosa cells and theca cells are there. So, further proliferation of the granulosa cell occurs, and theca cell leading to the formation of the luteal cell, that is the yellow in the color, and this is known as the carpus luteum. Carpus luteum secrete estrogen and the progesterone. The carpus luteum, it persists if there is the fertilization, otherwise start disintegrating, and it is converted into the carpus albicans. In carpus albicum, there occur due in carpus albicans the when we see the hormonal profile at the ovulation, the LH surge it start at the 36 to 32 to 36 hours before the ovulation, and it reach at the peak at the 12 hours before the ovulation. FSH level also increases, but it decreases at the time of the ovulation. Progesterone level it increases at the luteal phase, while the estrogen level it increases before the ovulation, and at the time of the ovulation the level of the estrogen it decreases, and then it slightly increases and it further decreases in the luteal phase. Thank you.